My name is Sarah and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm back to do a try a chapter reading vlog. I've been on holiday for the last week and I read some really good books actually, and I was just at the point where I finished my last holiday book that I was reading on the train home from the airport yesterday, and I finished it this morning. It is Thursday at the moment and I'm not back to work until Monday, so I still have a good bit of relaxation reading time. Sometimes when I've just finished a book, as I get home, I then get into not a reading slump, but just a bit of indecision about what to pick up next, because I have finished the books that I took on holiday with me and I have plenty of books I can read, but I don't know, I just get a bit oh, I have no idea what to pick. So I thought this would be a good way to decide. So I picked out 5 books that I think I could be in the mood for. And I actually have a couple of library books that I really should be reading because they're due back next week, but I don't know, there's something, I don't know if anyone else gets this, but as soon as there's time pressure on me to have to read a book, I just don't want to read it anymore. I picked up one of the library books to read and I was just like, no, not interested. I do still want to read it, it's just as soon as I know that I need to read it in the next couple of days, I just lose all motivation. So yeah, I'm not going to force myself to read things that I'm not in the mood for, because I think that's just going to put me into a reading slump. So instead, I'm going to try these books. So first book is a book I got for my birthday, and that's Between the Acts by Viriginia Woolf. I have read quite a lot of Virginia Woolf. I've read Mrs. Dalloway, Orlando, To the Lighthouse, and The Years or The Waves. I can't remember which one is which. I think it's The Waves I've maybe read. And this is one of her lesser known works. It says that it is her last novel, and in her own opinion it was more quintessential than any of her others. It's set in the summer of 1939 on the day of the annual village pageant. It weaves together the musings of several disparate characters and their reactions to the imminence of a war which is to change the pattern of history. So yeah, I think there's a play and it's set between the acts of this play. It sounds kind of summery and it is now absolutely freezing outside, so maybe not the best time to be reading this, but it is quite short, and it's one of those books that I think could sit on my shelf for years if I don't just get to it quite quickly. So I'm going to try this one. I had a flick through and I don't think that there are chapters, but there are some sort of stars between paragraphs, so maybe read to the first star, which I think is about 23 pages, so that seems like a reasonable chapter length. Yeah, I say that my favourite Virginia Woolf I've read is Orlando, followed by To the Lighthouse. I do really like her writing, but I need to be in the right mood for it. If I'm in a mood for anything slightly plot focused, then it's not a good idea. So I just realised that my cupboard was open and you can just see all of my messy clothes. And that I bought earlier this year with the intention of reading straight away and then just didn't get to is The Lady's Paradise by Emile Zola. I have read the first book in Zola's Viriginia cycle. So he's written a cycle of 20 novels that follow sort of 2 families throughout 19th century France. The first one I didn't love. So you may wonder why I've picked up another one, but basically all of these books, I think, more or less, can be read as standalones. They all have their own self-contained story. And there's a difference between the order that he wrote them in and the recommended reading order, and I think I started with the first in the recommended reading order, so I expect that some of the characters in this I'm maybe not going to know all of their backstory because I've missed a lot of books in between. So the first one I didn't love just because it was sort of set in a small village and there was quite a lot of political uprisings. You sort of needed to know a bit of the historical context to get it, which I did do some research, but there was just a lot going on in it, and I didn't fully fall in love with his writing style. But this one, The Lady's Paradise, is about Paris. It's about the development of the modern department store in late 19th century Paris. So it says, Octave Muret, the store's owner-manager, masterfully exploits the desires of his female customers. In his private life too, he is a great seducer. So I think this is going to be full of drama, I hope, and shops and Paris, and it sounds good. So I think this is 7th or 8th in the recommended reading order, but hopefully I'll be able to read them out of order and it's not going to be an issue. I read a bit of Brandon Taylor's article where he read all of the Viriginia series and then talked about them in relation to 21st century life. So I would like to read more so that I can understand a bit more about what the big deal is. First chapter of this one is about 30 pages and the book as a whole is over 400, so it's a bit of a longer one. So yeah, let's see how I got on with this one. Next book that I picked up quite recently is Nights at the Circus by Angela Carter. I have never read any Angela Carter, but this seems like a good sort of it's not a spooky book necessarily, but it seems like a good autumnal atmospheric read. So this is set in 19th century London, I think. In Nights at the Circus, Angela Carter has invented a new raunchy, ruckus Cockney voice for her heroine Fevers, taking us back into a rich turn of the 19th century world which reeks of human and animal variety and has produced her most flamboyant novel to date. So yeah, flamboyant sounds good. It sounds like it's going to be, again, quite full of drama, hopefully. And yeah, we'll see how we got on with this one. The writing is quite small in it, so at 300 pages, and the first chapter is 20 pages. So I think after 20 pages, I should get a good feel of whether I'm going to like this or not. One I put on my autumn TBR as a sort of October read, we are now in October, so this is a good option, is The Way of All Flesh by Samuel Butler. This is a sort of satire about Victorian values, I think. I read Erewhon by Samuel Butler back in May or June, and I really liked it. I think he does satire in a very interesting way. So I'm really interested to see how I got on with this one. Chapters are tiny in this one, so I think I might need to read like 3 or 4 chapters. But this is like 450 pages, but I think you should read quite quickly because it is like a mini book. Yeah, this is another one, like I picked it up in a second-hand bookshop quite soon after I finished Erewhon, and I was still like really motivated to read more Samuel Butler, and I feel like the longer it sits on my shelf, the more I'm losing motivation for it. So this is a good opportunity. And last is a book that I ordered just last week on a second-hand website, is Swordspoint by Kushner. So if you've seen my previous vlog, I've been trying to find some fantasy books that I really enjoy, and I've seen this really highly recommended on quite a lot of articles about more classic fantasy that's like maybe a bit lighter. This was written in 1987, and I think it's the first of a series. I don't know how many books are in the series, it doesn't actually tell me anywhere like how many books there are, but this one I think is meant to be quite funny. So it says, on the treacherous streets of Riverside, a man lives and dies by the sword. Even the nobles on the hill turn to jails to settle their disputes. Within this elite, dangerous world, Richard St. Vier is the undisputed master, as skilled as he is ruthless. So yeah, literally no idea. As I say, I just ordered it on a whim. It was like a couple of pounds online, so I was like, I'll give this one a go. And again, like when I'm trying something out for the first time, I buy loads of books to be like, I'll see what works, and then if I don't read them straight away, I sort of lose interest, or I like have managed to already hone in on what I like, and then I just sort of forget about things. I read a couple of chapters of this because I think the first one's only like 8 or 9 pages, but on the front there's a quote from George R.R. Martin that says, Swordspoint has an unforgettable opening and just gets better from there. So hopefully the beginning of this is interesting. So that's my plan. I'm going to read the first chapter or a couple of chapters of all of these books, and then I'll maybe pick 2 or 3 to read throughout the rest of the video. It's now the 10th of October, and I don't have like huge reading plans for the rest of the month. There are some things I'd like to get to, but nothing like super urgent. So yeah, I'll maybe just see how many I get on well with, and yeah, I will pick up however many I feel like from that. Yeah, I will check in once I've read the first chapter of a couple of these. It's the next morning, and I have now read a chapter from all 5 of the books. I was planning to update you after 2 books, but I just got through them all. So on a very positive note, I enjoyed all of the chapters of the books that I read, so that's good, but it has not made my decision-making process much easier, because I feel like I could pick up any of these books and enjoy them. So let me talk you through my thoughts, and then we'll see which ones we're going to read. So first I read the first 2 chapters of Swordspoint, and this took me to about page 21. It's a very strange start to fantasy novels. So at the very start we have this swordsman who has just killed 2 men in a duel, and he is returning home and he's sort of telling of his exploits. The descriptions at the start of this book are really nice. Like I think the writing is going to be really beautiful throughout, so I'll read like the first couple of lines. It says, snow was falling on Riverside, great white feather puffs that veiled the cracks in the facades of its ruined houses, slowly softening the harsh contours of jagged roof and fallen beam. Eaves were rounded with snow, overlapping, embracing, sliding into each other, capping houses all clustered together like a fairy tale village. So yeah, like the writing is really beautiful. Then the first chapter is told, yeah, as I say, from this swordsman going back to his home, and we sort of meet all of the characters there. They're all sort of discussing who's going to have killed who in this duel, And then for the second chapter, we change perspective and we get basically all of the rich people who were at this party. So the duel happened at a party, and it seems like what happens is rich people hire swordsmen to fight on their behalf, but in this situation we don't know who's hired who. So we find out that a duke has run away, and we assume that maybe he hired the loser of the duel and therefore he like went away in disgrace, but they're not sure. And we follow these three women that are having a very Jane Austen-esque discussion, like, you know, in Jane Austen when she's doing her social satire and there are lots of sort of women discussing just like trivialities and in like a really amusing way. This was exactly what chapter 2 was like. So we have these three women who are discussing the duel and they're talking about parties and who's been at whose house, and then the son of one of the women comes in and he is like attracted to one of this like a duchess. It's like very gossipy, and yeah, I think it's going to be a good fun book. It says in the inside cover that it says Swordspoint, a melodrama of manners. So I think this is going to be very like light in the fantasy and more, yeah, like social satire type thing. So I think it's going to be really good. So I'm definitely very intrigued by this one, and yeah, I think the writing's going to be nice. And I'm interested to see where it's going to go. I think we're going to jump between these two sort of perspectives, of the swordsman and then of these rich people. So then next I tried The Lady's Paradise by Emile Zola, and again I really like this one. So this is setting up for what I think is going to be quite a good story. So I didn't actually read the whole of the first chapter because it was about 30 pages and the rest of the book's first chapter is about 20, so I just read up to page 20, and so we have this sort of young woman, Denise, who arrives in Paris from the countryside with her two younger brothers, one of whom is 16 and the other one is just like a very young child, like 5 I think, and their father died maybe about a year ago, and upon their father's death they received a letter from their uncle who owns a shop in Paris to say, oh, come and stay with us if you want. But now a year has passed, and they've just decided at this point that they're going to take him up on his offer. Her younger brother already has an apprenticeship lined up in Paris, and uncle said that she could work in his shop. He's like a draper, so yeah, it's like a clothes shop. And anyway, so they arrive and straight away they see these huge department stores, and like especially Denise, she's like wowed by them. I guess if it's these are the first department stores, so there's never been a shop this size that's got such luxury, and in their small town she worked in a shop, so she's like comparing it to this, and they turn up at her uncle's and his shop is like on a sort of side street off this big main avenue, with the department stores, and his shop seems quite run down and it's very quiet, and he's not very pleased to see them essentially. So we get all this in the first like 10 pages, and he's like, oh well, yeah, I said that a year ago but a lot's changed, so I can't give you a job here, but I'll see if I can find you a job elsewhere. So he goes away with her and this other sort of draper's shop, and he's like, oh, you said you were looking for someone. He's like, oh, I've literally just hired someone. But while they're there, one of the managers from this big department store is like, oh, we're looking for someone if you want to come. So the next day she's got an appointment to go and see this woman about a job in the big department store. So I think this is going to be really good. Already I like the writing and the characters seem quite well developed. It also seems like her younger brother, who's 16, they've had to leave because he got into an affair with some married women, so he seems like a bit of a ladies' man, and I think that the relationship between them and their uncle is going to be really interesting. In the uncle's shop, his daughter is engaged to one of the salespeople, so that seems like it's going to be a really interesting relationship. So yeah, I'm like really intrigued by this one. And I picked up The Way of All Flesh by Samuel Butler, and I read the first 3 chapters. The chapters are very small, but the writing is tiny, so pages are quite small. So I think it probably adds up to like a normal page size, because yeah, the writing is really small in this. And this seems like it's sort of semi-autobiographical. Samuel Butler is sort of critiquing his own family history. It seems like he really didn't get on well with his father. At least this is what the footnotes were saying. So anyway, we're introduced to this character called Mr. Pontifex at the very start, and he's an old man, and the narrator can only remember him being an old man. And he has a son who he really likes. He's sort of a businessman, he's made a lot of money, but he's not a very nice person. and he has 5 grandchildren, to be about the same age as the narrator, which seems to be Samuel Butler's father's age. So at this point it's 1806, and this book was, and Samuel Butler wasn't born until I think like the 1830s or 40s, so yeah, it's very much his father's generation. In the first chapter, Mrs. Pontifex dies, and then Mr. Pontifex. So that generation's gone. The son's wife died in childbirth, so she's gone. So now we're left with the son and the 5 grandchildren. But I think that this book is going to be told from the perspective of another generation younger, because it says that it follows Ernest Pontifex, and nobody's called Ernest yet, so I think it's going to be the grandchildren's child that we mainly follow, and it seems like it's going to be a sort of social satire and comedy of manners almost. I quite like the tone of it so far. I'd say that out of the 5 books, this is the one I'm probably the least drawn to right now, just because I think it's going to be very, very slow burn, and I think it's going to be good, but yeah, I'm not as drawn to it, which is surprising, because if I was to guess, I'd have said that this was the one that I would have gone for. I've just had to change position because my feet were getting very sore. Then I picked up Between the Acts by Virginia Woolf, and this one, again, really enjoyed the first sort of 20 pages that I read. So in this, we're in a sort of big country house, and there are quite a lot of different characters that live there. So there is the head of the house, who's an old man, and his widowed sister, who is staying there at the moment. He also has an Afghan hound, which seems like it's going to be a big character. We've not really met his son yet, but his daughter-in-law is staying with her children at the house, and we also have a couple of other people that seem to be villagers that have come over. And yeah, at the point we're at, it's the morning of their sort of village pageant, and they're discussing what the weather's going to be like. Like, are we going to have it inside because it's raining? We sort of, as Virginia Woolf always does, we go between characters' heads into their thoughts. So we can see that like the daughter-in-law really does not like her father-in-law. The father-in-law is just quite a grumpy old man. The writing in this, as always, is really beautiful. There was a line that I really liked that I will see if I can find. Here we go. After breakfast, we're trundling the perambulator up and down the terrace, and as they trundled, they were talking, not shaping pellets of information or handing ideas from one to another, but rolling words like sweets on their tongues, which, as they thinned to transparency, gave off pink, green, and sweetness. So yeah, I just really love Virginia Woolf's writing. I think that this one is actually going to be one of her easier works, because so far it's very clear who's speaking at what point. It seems like it's going to be a very straightforward storyline. And it's all set during one day, which I think she does quite well, because in The Years of the Waves, whichever one it was I read, there's sort of this flow of time that is not very clear, so you just need to go with it, but at some points I was like not sure what time we were in. This I think is going to be quite straightforward in that sense, so yeah, I'm like very excited to get to this one. Lastly, I picked up Nights at the Circus by Angela Carter, and I read the first chapter, which again was about 20 pages. I think that this is going to be a really good book, but I think it will take me a little while to get through, because it is very, very descriptive so far. So we meet our main character called Fevers, which is sort of like Cockney for feathers, because she is a sort of trapeze artist that is meant to have wings. Like, she claims she has wings. She claims she was born from an egg, and basically she's like a con artist, but she's built her reputation off of having wings. And so everyone travels from far and wide to see her. And yeah, at the start of the book, she's being interviewed by this American journalist who is writing for a New York paper. She's just doing a show in London, but she has just signed on to do shows in Russia, Japan, and then on to America. So the idea is that he's going to sort of put out some promotional material for her so that everyone's excited about her arrival by the time she comes to America. And he's interviewing her in her dressing room just after her show. So there is like a lot of description of her dressing room, of her getting undressed, like her sort of helper lady is taking off her makeup, and she's I think the whole book is going to be their interview, that she's like telling him her backstory, and you know, does he believe it? Does he not believe it? Like, no, he's sort of skeptical. He's like, oh yes, she's a bird with wings. Like, that seems quite unlikely, because, you know, birds don't have arms, and she has arms and wings, so that's doubly unlikely. Like, if she was a bird, then she would just have the wings and not the arms. So like, he's skeptical, but at the same time he's sort of like trying to put some sort of logic into it. So I sort of had a flick through, and it seems like the first part of this book is set in London, and then the second part is in St. Petersburg, and then the third part is in Siberia. So I think, and I've had a flick and it seems like the journalist's name appears throughout, so I don't know if he's going to follow her on her tour with her. Yeah, I think it's going to be a really good book. I think it's going to be really interesting so far. Yeah, the descriptions are really beautiful. Some of the like turns of phrase are really interesting, and it's sort of tongue-in-cheek, like, it's, you know, it's sort of in on the joke, like she is not taking her seriously as a performance artist, is sort of poking fun at her and society this time. So I think it's gonna be really good. I just think it's gonna take me a while to get through. So plan of action, I think, is as follows. I think I'm going to start off with Between the Acts by Virginia Woolf, and at the same time I'm going to read Swordspoint, because this one's nice and short, and this one I think is going to be good fun. So I think this is a good pairing, because Virginia Woolf does take me a while to get through, so I don't want to just be reading this. I think it'd be nice to have something a bit lighter at the same time. And depending on time, I will next go to The Lady's Paradise by Emile Zola, and then again, very dependent on time, I will go for Nights at the Circus. I think for the moment I'm going to leave The Way of All Flesh. This is going back onto my bookcase for the moment, so I'll see how I got on time-wise with this month, but I'm really excited about all of these books. I don't think that's really the point of try a chapter tag. I think you're meant to sort of rule out more books, but this is good, this is promising. So yeah, I will do some more reading and I will check in soon. Okay, so it is now a couple of days later. My original plan was to read half of Swordspoint and half of Between the Acts and then come back with updates, but I got a little bit carried away and I just finished Swordspoint because it actually isn't as long as it looks. There are like 3 short stories at the end of it, so it's only 280 pages or something, and it is quite short. Like, it's quite a small book. I think I showed you before. Like, it's a pretty tiny book. So yeah, I sort of just flew through it. Sure what to think about this, to be honest. I think that potentially the first 2 chapters were the best part about it, which is a shame. Yeah, I didn't really like it, unfortunately. I don't think it made a lot of sense as a story, because yeah, at the start of this book we have our swordsman, and we're introduced to him, and he's just won his duel, and then we're introduced to lots of sort of noble people, but then there are an awful lot of more like extra noble people introduced. It gets a little bit confusing as to who's who, and what's also confusing is that they all seem to have plots and plans and schemes that they're trying to play out, but they're never described to us really. We learn little bits and pieces. It wasn't clear to me what I was meant to know and what I was meant to not know. And so because of this, there were like 3 or 4 people that are scheming. I don't know what their schemes are. And by the time that we sort of find out bits and pieces, I was confused. I was like, is this a reveal? Or was I meant to already know this? And what does that mean in terms of everything else? So yeah. It seems like a couple of the people are trying to sort of play the swordsman off against other noble people, and hire basically any swordsman for a duel, and you can duel someone to the death. If you challenge someone to a duel, they have the right to also put forward a champion for, like, to challenge them. So for example, if a nobleman hires our main swordsman Richard can go to this other nobleman and say, I challenge you to the death. But if they have a swordsman, they can be like, okay, sure, here's my swordsman, he'll challenge you to the death. So there was a lot of dueling going on, which I didn't mind. I don't think that our main character Richard was particularly fleshed out. He lives with man Alex he's in a relationship with. There was quite a lot of LGBT representation in this, and I thought it was presented fairly well considering this book was written in the 80s. Yeah, Richard isn't particularly, like, he's just a swordsman. He wants to duel. He knows that he's going to eventually lose a duel in probably the not too distant future, even though at this point he is undefeated, and yeah, he will die that way. And so that makes him a bit of a weird character because it seemed like he didn't really care about anything. He was in danger and he was like, well, I don't care, I'm just going to stay here and let it happen. But then as the book progressed, it seemed like he actually didn't want to like die particularly, and there were some scenes, there were some situations that he was put in that he just seemed a bit like stupid. Like he was like, this is not great, and he was just sitting there and someone else had to come and rescue him, which I'm like, that doesn't really make sense if you're some like great swordsman that's, I don't know, like not averse to danger. The characterization wasn't great. I wasn't sure any of the characters' motivations at any point in the book, really. Even at the end, when things were revealed, I was a bit unclear as to what the reveals meant. So I didn't love this. I think that the world that was built was interesting, but it's sort of just like a medieval, like there's no fantastical elements to this. It's just sort of like a medieval type town where all of the rich people live up the hill and all of the poor people live in sort of slums at the bottom of the hill, and there are jails. Like there's nothing really more to it than that, but I thought that that was quite good. But the writing was fine, but yeah, there were also some plot points that were developed and then didn't go anywhere. So there's a nobleman who's training to be a swordsman in private, but we reach a point he doesn't have to fight a duel at any point in this book, like spoiler. So I was a bit confused about that. Like, it's not that there's no development of that story, but it just sort of got forgotten. Yeah, I don't think I would particularly recommend this one. It was quite a fun reading experience, but by the end I was just like, no, I don't really care about this. So I'll say that the first chapter is indicative of the writing style, it's indicative of the type of story, but yeah, just for me the plot was not great. So that's unfortunate. And then I'm halfway through Between the Acts by Virginia Woolf. I am really enjoying this one so far. I think as this is one of her later works, her writing is really beautiful in it. It really feels like she has honed her craft very well, and yeah, there are some really beautiful lines in it. Yeah, this is set at the start of World War II, and yeah, we're in this large sort of manor house in a village, and all of these people have come together to watch the annual pageant play thing. So we do get a lot of different characters' perspectives, and as in Virginia Woolf's normal style, we're sort of jumping into all of their heads. This is definitely one of her clearer books to follow. I think I have only read 100 pages, but it's like under 200 pages, so I'm over halfway through. It's very clear which character is speaking at which point, and the characters all feel very distinct. We're getting a little bit of backstory for each of them, so it feels very clear as to all of their motivations, what all of them are doing here on this sort of summer day, and yeah, I'm enjoying it. We have got to the point where the play is now started, and there's quite a lot of dialogue from the play, which I'm not loving as much, like lots and lots of sort of script, but that's not so good. But yeah, apart from that, I'm going to probably finish it in the next day or so, and I will let you know my final thoughts. It's almost a week later and I am back to say that I have finished Between the Acts by Virginia Woolf. Yeah, I think when I last spoke to you I was like over 100 pages in, and honestly the last 100 pages really dragged to the point where I started picking up other books because I was just not in the mood to read this. I still enjoy it, but yeah, I think at about 100 pages the play that they were performing started, and we got like huge extracts from the play, just like loads of dialogue from it, like sort of written out like a script, and it just wasn't a very interesting play. And also lots of people arrived to watch the play, and we sort of got like bits of their conversations, like lots of characters were introduced, but they weren't really like developed characters. It was just bits of conversations from the audience, and I just sort of lost interest, and so I really had to force myself to read the rest of it. And the last 30 pages I enjoyed more, again because the play had finished and we got back to the main characters that we'd met at the start, and them sort of finishing off their day. I don't think that this is one of Virginia Woolf's best works. I still think it was good. I liked the first 100 pages and I did like the end bit, and I thought that it was like, it built up a good atmosphere of a nice sunny day and you're watching a play in midsummer in your garden. I thought that was good. There is this sort of underlying feeling of the war going on. Don't think it's started yet. But yeah, the Second World War is very much looming in the distance, and there's a bit of anxiety about that. I thought that was interesting, but yeah, I don't think it's one of her best works. I wouldn't really recommend, well, I definitely wouldn't recommend starting with this. I would only really recommend picking this up if you really like Virginia Woolf and you know that you want to read the rest of her work, because it's not that it was bad, it just wasn't my favourite. I would say that if you've never read any Virginia Woolf before, I would start with Mrs. Dalloway. I honestly think it's probably the easiest one to get into, set over the course of a day, and it's women planning her party. And you do get different perspectives, and it's not a completely straightforward narrative, but I definitely think that that's probably the best way in. Followed by To the Lighthouse. It's about a family staying at their summer home, and it's told sort of in 3 time periods, I think. So we get one when the kids are young, and then one when they're grown up, and then one sort of when the house is empty, I believe. It's really good. My personal favourite is Orlando, but I think that it's a little bit more difficult to get into because it's sort of spanned like hundreds of years, and we're following the same character throughout history, and he sort of transforms from a man to a woman, back to man again. And I thought like the writing in it is so beautiful. Yeah, that I would say that those 3 are the best ones to go for if you've never read her before. Yeah, as I say, it took me quite a while to get through, and I'm not really in the mood to pick up either of these other 2 books yet. I do definitely want to get to them soon. So yeah, The Lady's Paradise is the one that I'm definitely going to pick up next, but it's probably not going to be until next month now. Having just finished the Virginia Woolf, I'm not really in the mood to jump into another classic really. And Nights at the Circus I also do want to read, but I think it might be quite a dense read as well, so I'm just not in the mood for it. So yes, I'm happy that I've read 2 books from my TBR, and it definitely helped me get out of my sort of reading slump and just commit to reading some things. I think that going forward though, I feel like I've tried to do quite a few sort of themed reading vlogs, and I have a lot of fun thinking of like ideas and picking out books, but then when it comes to it, I'm not very good at sticking to a TBR, so I don't really think that's going to work for me going forward, is putting unnecessary pressure on myself, trying to force myself to read certain books, especially because I quite like to have a mixture of books. So for example, I did a reading vlog last month where I was reading fantasy books, which I really enjoyed, but I don't really want to read like 5 fantasy books in a row. I like a variety in my reading, so yeah, I don't really think that that's going to work going forward. As much as I really like watching other people's themed reading vlogs, I think I might need to do more sort of like just like a weekly reading vlog of what I'm reading in a week, so that it allows me to pick up whatever I'm in the mood for, because yeah, the strict TBRs, it doesn't really work for me. I do like to have some sort of idea of what I'm picking up next, so that I don't fall into the indecision of what to read, but yeah, not like these are the next 3, 4, 5 books that I need to read. That doesn't really work for me. Reading's meant to be a fun hobby, and I don't want to ever feel like I have to read something. So yes, that's where I'm at, but I very much enjoyed reading the first chapter of these books, and I am excited to pick up the other 3 that I didn't get to at some point in the very near future, hopefully. So yeah, I do hope you've enjoyed this video, and I will see you again soon.